Welcome to the Lighting Tutorial Series. This series will teach you the basics on the lighting systems in Pragma, the different types of light sources, etc. PFM uses a combination of dynamic and static lighting, aka baked lighting. Dynamic light sources can be animated, and they can cast dynamic shadows. However, they do not create any indirect lighting and overall produce less realistic results compared to static light sources. Static light sources, on the other hand, cannot be animated or cast dynamic shadows, but produce more realistic lighting at the cost of lengthy bake times. This example scene currently only contains static lighting, which has already been baked. If you move around the scene in the viewport, you can see soft shadows around objects and wall corners, which can only be achieved using static lighting. Note how the character standing in the living room has no shadow and appears evenly lit. This is because static lighting only affects static, immovable objects in the scene. Dynamic actors are mostly unaffected by it. For this reason, static lighting is generally only used for background objects, i.e. the stage or scene build of your animation. Since the static lighting has already been baked in this scene, it can no longer be changed without rebaking, which you will learn how to do in the next tutorial. For the purposes of this tutorial, we will focus on dynamic lighting first. Dynamic lighting can affect both static and dynamic actors. There are 3 types of dynamic light sources available in PFM. Spotlights, which emit light in a cone shape in a particular direction, like a flashlight. Point lights, which emit light in all directions equally, and directional light sources, which can be used to simulate sunlight. Let's start by creating a simple spotlight source. To do so, click this button and choose New Spotlight from the list. By default, new light sources are automatically placed in the Lighting collection in the Actor Editor. Every light source has several components that allow you to change its properties, such as the color, radius, light, and spotlight components here. Let's start with the light component. The intensity property of the light component allows you to change the brightness of the light source. By default, the unit for the intensity value is measured in candela, but you can also change it to lumen using the intensity type property. If the intensity type is set to candela, the perceived light intensity will be the same regardless of the light's cone angle. On the other hand, if the intensity type is set to lumen, increasing the light's cone angle will decrease the perceived intensity. By default, dynamic light sources do not cast shadows. This is because shadows require a large amount of video memory and are expensive to render, so you should use them sparingly. Although there is no hard limit, shadow casting light sources should generally be limited to 2 or 3 per scene at most. Try enabling shadow casting for this light source. The baked toggle determines whether a light source is dynamic or static. Light sources are dynamic by default, so we can ignore this property for now, but we'll come back to it in the tutorial for static lighting. The blend fraction property can be used to create soft or hard edges, with 0 being the hardest and 1 the softest. Try changing the value to see how it affects the light source. Sometimes placing a spotlight source in just the right way can be tricky using the viewport manipulator controls, in which case you can try using the camera link mode to place the light source instead. To enter this mode, right-click the light source in the Actor Editor and select Toggle Camera Link. While in this mode, the light source is temporarily linked to the work camera, allowing you to place it by moving the camera. You can also use the mouse wheel to change the cone angle of the light source. To end the mode and place the light source at the current location, simply left-click into the viewport. The distinction between static and dynamic lighting is only important when using the Pragma renderer. If you're planning on using a ray tracing renderer like Cycles X, dynamic and static light sources are treated exactly the same, and there is no distinction between them. Since Cycles X is a different type of renderer compared to Pragma, the lighting inevitably looks a little different. If you're planning on using the Cycles X renderer and you want to make changes to the lighting in the scene, you will have to enable the Live RT mode in order to preview the changes. This mode was already introduced in the viewport tutorial, but let's take a quick refresher. Press the Live RT button to enable the preview mode. Scene editing while in this mode is limited, but changes to light sources will be apparent immediately. Try changing the color, intensity, or cone angle of the light source to see the changes in the viewport. Please note that some properties, like the radius, do not have any effect when rendering with Cycles X. Before we conclude this tutorial, there is one more thing you should know. When working with spotlight sources, you can also add a simple volumetric effect to create the appearance of a light beam. Try adding the effect to this light source by right-clicking the light source in the actor editor and adding the Spotlight Volume component. The beam has the same color and angle as the light source it is tied to. You can, however, change the intensity of the light beam independently in the Spotlight Volume component properties. Please note that the volumetric effect works best if the light source is viewed from the side. This concludes the tutorial on dynamic lighting. You can now end the tutorial or press the Continue button to start the next tutorial in this series.